Welcome everyone to the webinar. We'll wait a few more moments for everyone to arrive and then we'll get started. If you all haven't had an opportunity, there is a QR code available to download the report, which we'll be referencing to quite a bit today throughout the webinar. Please take some time and download it whenever you have a moment. A couple more minutes, everybody. We're just having some technical issues. Stephanie's just jumping on the call soon. Thank you for your patience. All right. So while Stephanie's joining, I can perhaps take up the call. I really appreciate everybody joining in. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by Athennian, which is a leading entity and subsidiary management platform. Our webinar today is going to be a roundtable discussion on the current state of entity management, and will feature key findings from our recent report that that you can access with the QR code, which is the state of entity management. We released this earlier this month. Now, before we get started, I would love to go over some housekeeping items. So during this webinar, all attendees will be on mute just to cut down on any of the background noise. But that being said, we would still love to hear from you. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, please feel free to send them through the chat. We will also address as many questions as the time allows for. Now, if we aren't able to get to your questions, please do not worry. We will be following up with any of those remaining questions via email as well. We are recording today's webinar, and we will also be sending out this recording later with the link to the report, so please stay tuned for that as well. So let's get going. So today's discussion features unique perspectives from professionals who are working every day to navigate the various complexities of managing entities. So with that, perhaps we can kick off some introductions here. To introduce myself, my name is Jay Ricardo. I am one of the customer success managers here at Athennian. I work very hand in hand with customers from various verticals who represent perspectives in both global operations and fund management space as well. On the last slide, you will see my email address and LinkedIn. So should you want to stay in touch or have any other questions after the call, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Joining us from Wellbore Integrity, we have Diana Hendricks. Diana, would you like to take a quick moment and introduce yourself?
Yes, sure. My name is Diana Hendricks. I am Director of Legal Operations. I am thrilled to have this opportunity to really discuss the state of entity management with all of you today. So in my role, I'm going to be providing from the perspective in an in-house corporate vantage point. It allows me to provide kind of the insights and experiences that are grounded kind of in the practical realities, right, of managing managing entities, right, within a corporate environment. I did want to make sure that the views and opinions that I share today are drawn from my own entity management experience, right? Both small, large, global companies over the past 14 years. So they don't reflect necessarily the views or status of my company specifically. So I look forward to engaging in this productive and discussion with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you for the kind introduction, Diana. I'll pass it to Monica, who's the VP of Legal Innovation, Caravel Law. Monica.
Hi, everyone. My name is Monica Goyle. I'm VP of Legal Innovation at Caravel Law. I'm briefly legal. And we are, so Caravel Law, we are a law firm, but we provide different arrangements in terms of legal services. We do a lot of what we call fractional in-house counsel type of work with our clients. And one of the services that we provide is corporate compliance services or entity management services to our clients. And we're using Athennian in that service delivery. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about how that's been useful, but gives you a little bit of context about me and kind of our how we're using Athennian here. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, Monica. And then last but not least, Stephanie, joining us from the HSP group. Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I come with sort of 20 years of experience around the governance and particularly in the compliance sector. I have worked through my career in a lot of different multinational organizations that provide services around legal entity management or compliance, everything from sort of looking after companies throughout their life cycle. And what we see and what I'm hoping to bring today is, sort of the use of technology and what we see in the market currently, but also some trends around legal entity management and how we see the impact of some of the regulatory changes that we see across the globe with regard to sort of impacting some of those trends.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephanie. Really excited to learn all of your perspectives. So perhaps since you were the last person to introduce yourself, perhaps we can kick off with you. So let's jump right in. Stephanie, we noticed one of the trends that we noticed in our report that 67% of organizations, they're juggling entities around various global jurisdictions at 3 or more regions, which sounds quite cumbersome, quite complicated. So I would love to know your perspective to kick off. How do you manage all these regulatory curveballs without losing sleep or, in fact, your mind at times?
With great difficulty. I think that's probably where a lot of us in the panel find themselves, brought in, because it's very difficult to manage yourself as a corporation at times, where you have quite large global spread. Trying to manage different regulatory considerations, different laws in different countries, whether that's culturally, but also language can be a big factor, as well as time zones. I think being very organized, technology is a big driver as well. How you manage your data, how you manage and structure things internally, what becomes your Bible, your source of truth for your group and or for your group of entities. I think that's probably the biggest headache, and what probably keeps me up awake at night sometimes is, meeting those regulatory deadlines, how we can manage and ensure that we have the data that we need when we need it, to make sure that we meet filing deadlines, or when there are requirements for large deals or large transactions, when there's documentation needed, how that could be pulled at short notice. But yeah, it is a difficulty, and one that we certainly see a lot of our customers facing.
Fascinating. So that's really interesting perspective, especially around maintaining that single source of truth while staying on top of those constant compliance deadlines. So then perhaps building upon that, Monica, any perspective from your end then, since you're in your role at Caravel Law?
Yeah, so we manage for other companies, we manage their compliance requirements and their entities. And so some of our clients, it ranges from, very small businesses to larger organizations where they have maybe 20 plus entities. And so it's not just a matter of, like, in our experience, it's not just a matter of like, where they might be operating. They could be also operating in a country. They can have different regional requirements. So like for example, in Canada, every province could have its own requirements. And so we have to make sure that we are alive and we understand all that. We have to track deadlines and so forth for those entities. And then any one, like, for example, like I said, there could be a group of entities that we're managing for a client. And so there might be different kind of deadlines in relation to that group of entities as well. So that becomes another kind of, I think for a lot of really big organizations, that becomes another challenge that they have to deal with. And so what we found, and just from a practical perspective, just the calendaring and the deadlines and keeping track of all of that can be like a one person job. And so having a system where you can keep track of like what are the deadlines, and then the way that we actually manage that is we pull reports on a monthly basis. So we pull reports. What are the compliance that are coming up? And that has been hugely beneficial for us in terms of making sure that we are keeping track of it all, because it's a lot.
It's a lot to deal with. No, I love the perspective that you're sharing, especially with the reporting side of it. It kind of it's an additional tool to just stay on top of your content deadlines that you have to keep up, especially for a larger organization. So I think I would like to build upon that, as well as something Stephanie mentioned around, maintaining that single source of truth and entity management. And I think that goes perfectly into the next statistic I would love to learn more about is 68% of legal teams are very lean. And we notice in the report as well is just 1 to 3 maybe people are running the entity management. So perhaps Diana, I think your perspective would be valuable in this case, as well as, do you think this surprises you? And with what Monica and Stephanie just shared, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I don't think this surprises me. It definitely doesn't surprise me at all. Companies are consistently battling headcount constraints and limitations, and this results in lean legal teams. In many cases, just one person is not solely responsible for entity management functions, but they may also be responsible for a variety of other legal functions that are going on. This multitasking, I think, is just a common scenario in the corporate legal departments. Actually working in-house. Efficiency, resourcefulness are just key to handling, the diverse and the very demanding workload.
Got it. And Monica, what would you like to say about this?
This I think this is like it's very challenging for corporations because I understand that sometimes the external kind of legal spend might be expensive and so they might be looking to build up their internal teams, except you know, for what we find is like with the service that we provide, for example, that we are providing that kind of support to corporations. So we provide to our clients, we provide that kind of like support so that they don't have to build this in-house capacity around it. Um, and I think that can be very useful for corporations to think about prior to kind of setting up one of these teams themselves. And it's this figure itself is, I think, not very surprising because it's not like even within legal, there's so many things that corporations have to think about. This is not necessarily like the only thing that they have to worry about. So they want to manage like their other kind of needs as well. There's so many things. So yeah.
Interesting. And would you say, and perhaps Stephanie, you can jump in as well in this one, but around the same aspect then, um, I know that Monica, you mentioned there are so many sort of moving pieces within the legal space itself. So then how critical does that sort of maintenance of that single source of truth become for you, especially when you're working with these lean teams?
Is that one to me or Monica? But I'll pick it up
Oh,
first, and
Stephanie,
if
yourself.
Monica wants to
Yeah.
add, no problem. Certainly what we see, and we would deal with hundreds of customers, in our area of business, but we'd be seeing there a variety of different scenarios. You'll have large corporates that have very large, very uh, very competent legal teams that have people sitting sort of across functions, to companies that will have one person who is wearing 4 different hats, and they're outsourcing quite a lot of their legal work to legal counsel to support them. And what we see obviously is sort of the outsourcing of some of these functionalities around entity management, but indeed putting in place some of those processes or good technology that will help them make their work more efficient and more effective. And it comes back to that single source of truth that you were saying. If what happens with legal teams, as we see, is that everyone's coming to them looking for the right document, that the support that they need. That might be finance looking for something for a tender process. The accounting team looking for the dividends that were paid out last quarter last year, and all of that seems to sit often with legal teams. That may be separated now, as we're starting to see, particularly in Europe, into governance teams rather than legal teams. So we're seeing some sort of separation around who controls entity management, or indeed that COSEC function, but certainly still sort of capped often under legal or legal and compliance.
Fascinating. Okay.
I think to
So
further
that's
upon that, what Stephanie was saying too, is you kind of find ways to work smarter, not harder, and find ways to give somebody a self-service tool, just by launching something like an entity management platform, maybe a summary view only, where people can just go to the platform and they can get that information themselves. So that kind of gives a little bit of a self-service
right.
resource for others, so that those global tenders that are happening, no matter if somebody's on vacation, no matter where they are, they can go get that information. It's at their fingertips.
Yeah,
Got it.
I just to expand on what Diana and Stephanie said, like I totally agree, and that's one of the things that we really like about like the Athenian system that we're using, because with our clients, and they like that feature too, because it does allow us to share a summary view with the clients, and so they can self-serve. So instead of them coming to a lawyer or a law clerk and saying, like, their external counsel and saying, hey, I need this document, can you get it for me? They can just go on and look up that information themselves. And we can control who has access. So if client wants their accountant or they want like their finance department or whoever to have access, we can give them access to it. So yeah, I think just even from like kind of external counsel, law firm perspective, this can be very kind of useful. And like what Diana and Stephanie says, it sounds like that's what clients are looking for as well, right?
Absolutely. And I think it just creates a better, a high degree of transparency, a high degree of, ease of access when it comes to extracting your information that's within an entity management space, especially from a client's perspective. So that's amazing perspective. And I appreciate all of you sharing. And I do see some of the questions that are popping in. Please submit your questions throughout at any time. And at the end, we will be addressing through our Q&A as well. So as we're continuing to talk about this entity management a little bit more, I would love to touch on this other statistic. So we also noticed then that is, Monica, I know it's super helpful to you and the team at Caravel Law, but we also know that 21% of legal teams are highly satisfied with their current entity management software. So what do you think is contributing to this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, so I've looked at personally, I think a lot of the solutions in the market. And one thing that I find is that how people even like a lot of people will say, oh, I'm an entity management software. And what the functionality is actually very different. And so there are solutions in the market and they're just like, there may be cap table management and they have entity management kind of like as another feature, or they're a board software and they have like, some entity management features, but they're not robust or stuff. So I think part of this dissatisfaction, like if I was to guess, I think part of the dissatisfaction is that the tools aren't really matching what they say they do, or they aren't as comprehensive as people need. And I always suggest before anybody purchases a software, to try it out. I know it can be very kind of tiresome or cumbersome process for like small legal teams to kind of maybe do that, but I think it's very important in especially this space to do that because of just the variability of solutions that are on the market right now.
Interesting. So really what I'm understanding is, and I think that's such a good perspective. I mean, working at Athennian, I also get to see some of the solutions out there and how, their primary they may say that they are, let's say, in the entity management space, but they are actually catering to a completely different need for either, users in the legal space, if not in other departments. So I think it can kind of really liquidate that use case, so to speak. Diana, what are your thoughts on this satisfaction rate that we captured in the report?
I think that this could be a combination again of outdated technology, manual processes, right? And even the challenges that are associated like with the data migration to a new vendor, right? So that comment, I mean, that altogether could contribute significantly to that dissatisfaction. So many legal teams are using some antiquated software that really hasn't kept pace with the modern requirements. These kind of systems, they require a significant amount of manual input and uploading. You kind of have to have one person dedicated only to that, and it gets kind of cumbersome, and you get tied down to a lot of that. So that is obviously time consuming, but also prone to errors, right? So I know that can be kind of frustrating for teams that need to accurately and quickly manage large volumes of data. Additionally, like the older platforms lack the flexibility needed to adapt to like present day needs, integrations with others, with other platforms. So for instance, leveraging something like DocuSign through your platform, you're trying to keep up to date. So you're sending this through DocuSign, but then, oh, we forgot we had to file it and upload it to our platform and then enter all that information, right? So I think updating or customizing the systems to kind of meet those current standards, can be challenging, sometimes if not impossible, without like substantial investment, right, in time and resources.
Right.
I think another critical issue is the difficulty in transferring and extracting that information if you wanted to switch to a new vendor, right? So legal teams have been using these legacy systems for years, right? They may find it cumbersome to migrate their data to a more modern platform. And that process of data extraction and transfer itself can be pretty expensive and complex, with potential data loss, or even corruption, right? And that further discourages teams from making the switch. But overall, I think investing in more modern, user-friendly solutions, will greatly enhance the efficiency, satisfaction of legal teams. They're not always in the weeds. They're actually getting to strategize and do the more fulsome work that they need to be doing versus sitting here just data entry consistently.
Thank you, Diana. I think some of the great points that you touched on, I mean, it's such a major concern, especially when you're transitioning towards more of a modern, solution, so to speak, is that data loss and, maintaining that data recovery at all times. So you are still on top of that single source of truth as you're finding a solution that works for your needs as well as for the team. So also having a solution that has those sort of systems in place when it comes to that extraction and migration of that data itself can be really valuable, from what I'm really understanding from what you're saying. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Stephanie, anything you would like to add before we touch on another statistic?
I think it's been well covered already. I think, not surprising at all with this statistic about what we see, across the board. And I think it marries into what we've already said about sort of the capacity and sort of how lean some legal teams are running as well. So, not surprising that, the struggles would be really around the technology and solutions that they're using as well.
Right. Well, that's a fair point, and I appreciate that perspective. So I guess, just to keep the call moving, I would love to then touch on sort of the growing sort of budget, the established budget and the growing compliance demands, and the costs associated with it. I know, Monica, you mentioned it briefly when you were touching on some other information. Is how there is this existing budget and how there are increasing costs, and you have to stay on top of these constant demands. And so we have seen these 42% of organizations where they are constantly keeping up with the growing compliance demands. So how have you seen this happen in your organization in Caravel Law? How are you seeing this money being spent? Any best strategies on how to keep the value in alignment with the investment that you're making, and also making sure that you're staying on top of these compliance demands?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very different perspective for us because we're in a law firm, and we have we have to think about kind of like our clients and kind of what they're willing, or what what the market is kind of demanding in terms of like what are the different solutions out there. And so what we find is that we can be kind of a way for our clients to mitigate some of that increase in external spend. So sometimes clients will come to us looking for alternatives to the big law firms, and as a way to kind of mitigate, or to I should say mitigate, but to help uh, manage their external legal spend. And so, for example, with this entity management, because we are using technology and we are so kind of embedded in technology and processes in our workflow, we can provide kind of really nice solution that can help clients with their budgets, or kind of managing their budgets. And we actually have seen that there's been a lot of pressure on legal departments in terms of their budgets, especially I think in this year. There seems to be, like in Canada, a lot of kind of pressure on cost pressure. So I think, kind of the services that we provide, I think, can be very useful for
Right.
clients in terms of managing that. But yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Monica. So Stephanie, you work with, with the clients that you work with, I think this must be a common pain point that you must see with them as well. So how have you been approaching this?
Yeah, so we've seen a real swing. You'll either see sort of, corporations and companies globally that are really starting to pull in the purse strings, tighten things up, making cuts or consolidation globally. And we've seen that particularly in sort of some of our M&A areas as well, where it sort of is part of a consolidation. But I think on the flip side, we have seen in certain countries a real understanding as to there needs to be additional spend to control and mitigate risks going forward, in a way that we probably haven't seen over the past number of years, where there is definitely an understanding now of the impact of regulatory penalties, and how they can impact your company. So we're starting to see these really creeping in, particularly say, the Middle East, with Asia. There's definitely a larger understanding of the need for a slightly larger budget in the areas around sort of compliance, governance, and legal. And that's where we're starting to see companies think about not only potentially looking to outsource or indeed increase their headcount. We certainly see that sort of in discussions that we have with our HR consultant team. But I think the driver really is, how can we ensure that we are operational efficient globally? What is it that we need to do? And those are the questions that they're coming to us asking. And sometimes it is a case of, well, it's going to cost you X, to put this in place, or you really need to think about widening this budget, and having those difficult conversations. So yes, there might be budgetary constraints on one side, and I certainly think, though, on the other side, we do see that there is a reallocation of spending, if I put it that way, to an understanding of what might be important now within an organization.
Fascinating. Thank you, Stephanie. I think one of the good points that you brought up about is sort of the increase in, staying on top of your compliance and compliance demands, and the increased penalties as well, especially in the EMEA region. So I think I would love to get Diana's perspective on this. Are there any strategies you have in place to stay ahead of that, just so that you don't impose any penalties on your ends, your organization?
I guess really, in all honesty, it's unfortunately quite the opposite for me in actually getting an increased budget. I am facing drastic cuts, actually. So I do have to come up with some creative ways and creative solutions sometimes as workarounds. In all honesty, we did put the entity management platform in place this past year. And I will tell you, before, there were so many financial penalties that were coming about. Kind of took a lot of that information, said, okay, here's how much we were spending on all the penalties, fees, and fines, and justified an entity management software platform in implementing that solution. I think in that case, we have greatly decreased all those costs associated. So about the same amount that they were spending, we were able to pull in an entity management platform. So I think this was, I've been in the smaller companies where you're leveraging your Outlook calendar, you're leveraging Excel spreadsheets, and maybe there's 5 different ones that you're trying to look at, and then sometimes somebody didn't update it, or you have an employee turnover event, and you're trying to find out all the information because somebody else handled this before. So it's really just gathering all that data into one place that can survive that employee turnover, and that can survive, trying to find all that information, just getting that in one place.
Yeah. And if I could just add to that, Diana, I think that's such a great point, because, that's also true within the law firm as well. So that was one of the impetus or reasons for us to move towards the entity management system, was that, even in the age of digital information, like if you're using SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever it is that you're using, you could still have like all this information in different file folders or like emails, like you said, and how are you tracking like all the dates and so forth. And so what we found is that actually sometimes in some people's file folders, you could have multiple versions of documents, right? So it's like, which one is the actual one, So with the entity management, it's like a nice way to keep track of all that, and it reduces that risk, that legal risk, right? That you're,
Correct.
yeah.
And especially if you are in very complex countries, there's some that have just, there are, I don't know, I think in India alone, how many filing obligations I have, I would not be able to keep up or keep sane without something that reminds me, hey, we have this filing obligation, and I'm not having to try to do this last minute and everything's on
Mhm.
fire, running around trying to find, oh, I know somebody's going to be on vacation in 2 weeks. He's a director on here and he has to sign. Oh, you know what? I'm going to be thinking ahead already versus, oh, we have to sign and this person's on vacation and we can't file until that person gets back. And now we have penalties and fines. So it's really good to have that. I'm not feeling like my hair's on fire and running around everywhere, right? And getting worried about that. It does help me sleep better at night, though, it might just be a little bit better because I know we were talking about lack of sleep.
Yes, no, that's absolutely fair. And as I mentioned earlier, like, I mean, I work with customers in various verticals, and this is a very common pain point I see is, making sure that all that data is living in one place, especially when, newer customers who come aboard and we see they have various files and various, document sort of management spaces like SharePoints, I manage, and extracting all that, putting that all in one hub as a repository, and then being able to make sure that you have the right documents that really are the most recent ones and ones that your teams can rely on is it can be really critical, especially as you're trying to stay on those compliance demands as well. So love the perspective that you all shared, and I think, Diana, I'm going to keep bringing you back into this. I would love to then know, especially with the drastic cuts that you just talked about at Bellball. The report also mentioned is the rising cost of external legal counsel. So then what are some of the tips that you would suggest to get this under control?
I think use of corporate agents versus law firms, a lot of times they can save you a lot more money. So
Mhm.
kind of, you also have alternative legal providers, right? But the corporate agents, they pretty much know everything there, and you can kind of utilize them for just pretty much all of your corporate acts, filings, obligations, where you need to utilize those, and then save the law firms for the bigger issues like employment issue here or a litigation concern. That way, you're not depleting your entire budget from just managing an entity or filing, keeping up with your filing obligations.
Interesting. Thank you, Diana. That's some great perspective. So I would now love to then take it in a slightly different direction. And I think, Monica, this one will be passed to you, but we are hearing from a lot of our customers that they're actually getting a dedicated budget and even marching orders at times to go purchase AI solutions. AI is on the rise. It's becoming more and more of your day-to-day workflows. So we see 47% of respondents to the reports are gearing up to use AI in various methods for this compliance automation. So have you started working with AI yet? And if not, sort of what's the hesitation? I mean, I would love to get perspective from all three of you. So perhaps, Monica, if you can kick it off, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Where I would start, so I think the starting point is kind of thinking about what AI is good for, because I think there's a lot of buzz around just the term AI, and then a lot of people just angling to incorporate AI, not really understanding maybe what it's good at and what it's not. There's recently been a benchmark study that's been released by an organization called vals.ai. It's like if you go to vals.ai and you look there, you can see they did a legal benchmarking study, and it showed what what they did in their benchmark is they had lawyers do particular tasks, and then they had the LLM, so they had generative AI doing particular tasks, and then they compared to see who did that particular task better, those in terms of legal tasks. And there was certain areas where actually the LLM did better, and there are certain areas where a lawyer did better. And so
Right.
I think keeping that in mind, so it's like summarizing of information, extracting information, um, those are areas where the AI can be very useful. But if you are talking about generating, for example, resolution based on where you have to have, the correct names of the directors, or correct names of officers, or the dividend amount has to be, correct, whatever is that information, there's a high level of like accuracy, and those documents are really, can be templatized, they're very kind of standard kind of documents. So I think like document automation or task automation is sometimes just better and easier. But if you're like inputting a large amount of information into an entity management system, for example, maybe the AI could be useful in that, but you have to use it carefully. You have to, if you allow it to kind of extract information, you have to then go back and verify and check. And so,
Hmm.
it's not like you can just let the AI do its thing and it's like some magic thing. It's a tool that can be used to assist and maybe expedite certain types of tasks. So I think you have to be very, mindful or very intentional in terms of how you use AI, and it has to be correct.
I love that you say that, and being very specific with what use cases you're trying to address with AI can be really critical. And I also really like the aspects you're talking about, not necessarily just fully relying on AI, but also having that human element. I mean, we have built our own AI solution as well, and there is a human element that we use to make sure that the information that's still going into entities is verified by our actual users, instead of just fully relying on AI, because at the end it's designed to support our users than be the main user itself. So I love that perspective that you're sharing. And Diana, Stephanie, I would love to hear from you as well on what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, I'll go on that one first, if you don't mind. I say, AI is the way of the future, right? There's no way to avoid its use. So I was on vacation just recently, and with my best friend since college, and her daughter was sitting there doing her homework, and even the professor encouraged the students to complete their assignments leveraging AI. And I thought that was like, whoa, really? It has the potential really to revolutionize how we handle compliance, and it speeds up those mundane tasks and automates the various functions and processes. And just as Monica mentioned, AI is not 100% accurate. That's why we still have our jobs, right? But you should always have that. Make sure you're verifying. But I will give you an example case. As I said before, a lot of companies have headcount constraints and limitations. So maybe I can't add somebody to my my team. So I kind of got a little, I guess, creative, and I went through another company who hires people to do, data entry tasks, kind of like a virtual assistant, typically remote, right? But to do this, obviously, this person doesn't have legal experience whatsoever. So, for example, filing and uploading documents, it would be, you try to explain every corporate document is very difficult, right? And I'm going to bring in Athennian's option here, where there's an upload with AI feature through the centralized function. I don't know if anybody's seen it before, but wow, it's pretty cool. So you simply upload your corporate documents, right? You drag and drop, and I believe you can go up to like 100 files. So let's say you threw in a whole 100 files or something. It processes the document details, right? Extracts that relevant information like the entity name, the effective date, right? Even summarizes the actions like in the description. And I found that, it's pretty accurate for this, and this function has helped me greatly because it's freed me up. She can upload, she can see it, and oh, okay, this is what this is for. And then if she has any questions like outside the standard, like these are minutes, I'm trying to understand it, maybe, you know, she can come back and ask me some clarification questions, but pretty much it does that, and then you can press file and it files it within that specific entity's minute books, right? And this has been a game changer. I think there's a lot of people who have to deal with uploading documents all the time, and even if you feel that that's your sole job, is just, and you're going to lose your job if you get something like this, I wouldn't think that would be the case. It would be something where you get to actually do some better work, you know, that you could make more of a difference in your company than just feeling like you're uploading constantly and just data entry. You know, so it might like your job more. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
It definitely helps, and by the way, I love that you're using centralized, and I would also recommend you to check out our email functionality. And for you know, we have built an email functionality that you have a unique email address associated with your account only, and your users can send documents directly, and it will automatically put that straight into centralized for you. So then that way you don't have to necessarily keep uploading and dragging and dropping documents. But you know, I think talking about that human element again, going back to it, I think AI, you know, there's this fear in a way where, you know, it's potentially going to make jobs sort of redundant. And in my opinion, it may not be the case, because at the end, we always are going to need humans to sort of verify the information that is going in. And I think, you know, I was at Clark last year in EMEA in London, and one of those things that we talked about as well is how important it will become in the future for individuals who are using NC management solutions and other legal tech solutions to stay on top of the information in a more sort of constructive way than just doing the sort of repetitive tasks like data entry, then document uploads, something that you just talked about, Diana. So I love that. Love your thoughts. And Stephanie, I would love to pass this to you before we kick off the next question as well.
Yeah, and just very quickly, I think the wording here is sort of gearing up towards and to use AI, I think is important. I think what we've seen is that there's certainly an interest. We're seeing a lot of policy development or reviewing of policies and language use. You know, what that means for you know, how companies are going to use AI and what constraints they're going to put around that for not only internal use, but also external. I think what we've seen the biggest change in is board minutes, to bring it back down to sort of, you know, COSEC and legal entity management, and transcribing of virtual meetings and the use of AI for that. That's been a real game changer for quite a lot of our clients, where it's just sort of speeding up that process. It still needs, you know, the COSEC to review, to, you know, it still needs the person, but it does mean that you're not having to transcribe those minutes yourself verbatim and spending hours going through those. And there's some really fancy tools now that will just record the meeting and transcribe them directly. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see how it develops and redefines sort of what governance and the COSEC roles are in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, AI, as Monica even mentioned earlier, AI is here to stay, and I think you know, I think it's just going to get better with time. It's going to evolve into a bit more of a reliable, more robust solution. So yeah, we're all excited to see what it presents to us in the future. So moving on to the next query, and perhaps Stephanie, I would love to pick your brain on this one. Sorry, I think my system's acting out. Bear with me for a moment. There we go. So we also highlighted in the report, 93% of businesses see poor NC management as a massive legal risk. Now, how do you make sure everyone in your organization is staying on the same page? You know, especially when it comes to best practices around the poor NC management. I would love to hear that, and then I would also love to hear sort of how are you staying on the same page to avoid missing deadlines as well.
Yeah, so quite a loaded question there. I think to start with, I think certainly the people that have probably responded to the survey have been people that have an interest in this area. So let's start with that, right? In that, those people that are identifying these as risks understand what legal entity management is, because I think sometimes if we went to the people on the street, we in our jobs are constantly trying to shake people to get them to understand that that there are huge risks if they don't manage their entities properly and that they don't manage their compliance in an effective way. So I was quite happy to see this statistic coming through, and that there was a real understanding from people as to if we don't really properly manage compliance, and if you don't put controls around entity management, this is a massive risk. And that's not only from a regulatory risk perspective, penalties, as we've discussed before, financial or otherwise, but also reputational risk. I mean, we've seen this, with regard to sort of, board meetings not being properly documented, AGMs not being held in the right way, and what the repercussions are there for publicly traded companies. But sort of if we take a step back and we say sort of, on the very generic, regulatory compliance and meeting deadlines, we can be up against it. And Diana mentioned earlier, India is a good example, China, jurisdictions that we're all aware are quite complex with regard to ensuring that returns are quite, can be quite heavy in terms of the documentation that are required, wetting signatures or company seals or stamps required on certain documents. And if we don't have good controls around who has the documents, where are they, where can I find them, where's the most updated copy, who is the signatory, where's my latest share registry, who are the directors of this entity, you sitting in the US or in Germany, and you maybe have 220 entities under your control, it can be extremely difficult to remember that that director resigned from that entity, or we moved them around and reshuffled them. So I think really having that control and good process in place makes a massive difference, to be able to mitigate and manage those risks that we face on a daily basis with regard to trying to balance some of those deadlines. But being organized, being having good processes in place is probably the best way to try and manage it.
That's brilliant. I really appreciate sharing this perspective as well. Thank you so much. Monica, any thoughts you would like to add? I know we are coming up on time, so I have one last question after this, but passing to you, Monica.
I don't really have much beyond what Stephanie said, because I think she summarized it quite well. And I also was happy about the statistic, because it doesn't really align with our experience. Like maybe it's because we are external counsel, but we find that a lot of times we have to educate clients about the importance of this, and they're not alive, or they're not as worried. Like, they're worried about a lot of things in their business, and this is really not very high sometimes on their list. And there is a lot of legal risk that it presents. So for the reasons that Stephanie talked about, it's a real risk.
Definitely. No, and I really like the perspective, kind of just a wholesome perspective that you both have shared around, Stephanie, even you mentioned about how somebody's sitting in the US and they have over 200 entities in various global jurisdictions, and compliance needs and requirements in various global jurisdictions can be really complex. So I think it appears that in different ways there are various methods to stay ahead of that curve. So I would love to move on to sort of the last question before we open for Q&A as well. And we are seeing, sort of, given all the shifts happening in compliance and entity management, what's the one strategic change you think every legal team should sort of start working on now to then stay ahead? And I know, Diana, like you mentioned, even sleeping a little bit better at night. So Diana, maybe perhaps if you want to kick off this question, and I'm happy to repeat myself as well.
Oh, no problem. I think in all honesty, having that centralized platform ensure that all the entity related information is easily accessible and up to date. That
Hmm.
significantly reduces the risk of errors and omissions, right? And it's crucial to be utilizing it across your organization. Ensuring everybody who's involved in energy management kind of is on the same page, right? Having the calendar function so it's automated in a way that you get a report every month that might be delivered. This is what you have to do, and make sure you are going through with that. But in addition to implementing, a platform, it's important to continuously just keep going, educate yourself and your team, attending these webinars, talking with others. Actually, it's pretty interesting when I get to hear, Stephanie's perspective here, and I go, oh, that aligns exactly to what I'm going through. And it's good to kind of get that back from everyone else and get that feedback and know other people are dealing with this and how are they dealing with this, and what are their workarounds, and that's always good. So keeping informed about the latest trends and practices is amazing, and then educating others within the organization. Sometimes some of this can get off of your plate. I don't wear just an NT management hat. I'm here at the corporate governance with risk and insurance needs. I mean, we're going all over the place. So it is good to have others that are within your organization kind of know what the lack of oversight, what can it do? It can create some serious compliance issues, right? Financial penalties, reputational damages, as Stephanie said. But if you also have like licenses attached to your good entity status, and maybe something, gets, I think I answered one of these questions. What's the worst outcome you have seen from poor entity management practices? We missed out on a huge contract opportunity. It seemed that entity was just not in good status, that they're forcing liquidation status. Well, then the actual license in that country that's required, lapsed as well. To get that back up and running would have taken months, and that's huge. That's income. You just lost income right there. And so it can have as much get pretty bad. You don't want to be that person who says, "Oh, we can't take on that $100 million contract because, oops, the entity is not in good status," or you can't actually dissolve an entity because maybe I had a problem with one director one time, not at this company, who died, and he was the only director on there, maintaining those policies, having more than one director, and we just couldn't dissolve it just that way. We had to go through so much. Took 3 years for a lot of that. So just keeping up to date and keeping that platform, I think overall, having and if you can't afford a platform, having something that you can go to that everybody can access, is helpful.
Very much so. No, that's brilliant perspective, Diana, and I appreciate that. I know we're coming to the end of our time here. There's been a great discussion, from all your perspectives as well. I think it's clear that NC management is constantly evolving and very rapidly, in fact. And we are finding there are tons of new challenges, but then also we are also finding some amazing emerging opportunities that we can really leverage upon. So I would love to hear from audience now. Audience, let's jump into a little bit more on the questions. Please feel free to drop yours in the chat if you haven't already done so, and we'll get through a couple here, and then we can certainly answer the rest of the questions via email. So I do see one of the questions here. Give me one moment. So I think it's a good question. It may sound very simple, but it can be quite cumbersome. So at what point do the panelists see companies onboarding an entity management platform? Is it sort of like a certain number of subsidiaries, or would you say are there like specific criterions that you'd like to meet before you onboard a solution?
Yeah. I think Diana and Stephanie probably have good answers to this, but just, from our perspective, because sometimes the clients will ask us, and just looking at the cost of what entity management of what the solutions cost, I think it's probably not suitable for somebody who has like one or two or even up to like 10 companies. Like it's when you have like, I would say 15 plus type of companies that you're managing the compliance, or multiple jurisdictions like we talked about, where there's like very complex kind of compliance requirements, that's when I would look at kind of an entity management system. So that's just from my experience. I don't know what Diana and Stephanie think.
Yes, and I'll be honest, I come into a new company, and if they don't have an entity management platform and they have more than, I'd say 10 entities, different countries, right? I think that would 10, 15 would be the right number. When it becomes, and what I said, when it becomes difficult to be trying to track all of this on an Excel spreadsheet without somebody in finance who can sit here and teach you everything about pivot tables and all of that too sometimes. I think that's when it becomes okay, and you're missing deadlines. So you kind of want to just feel where your company is at that moment in time, but pretty much that's around about number is getting 10, 15 in different countries, and very difficult with Excel spreadsheets.
I also think it depends on the sector and the type of company as well. So, we obviously, if we're talking about publicly listed companies, obviously they tend to have a lot more, reach globally. But, certainly if you have a requirement where you're publicly listed, there's going to be a much larger shareholder registry to manage, and that's much easier to do through some form of technology. Some sectors as well where you might find sort of in whether it be oil and gas or whether it be construction, something like that, where you might be entering into a lot of tenders, or if you are conducting business with government, we often find that there'd be quite a heavy amount of paperwork and demands for paperwork. So any of those sectors where you would see that there's quite a large requirement to produce any of those corporate documents outside of a regular compliance cycle or calendar links, that can be quite useful as well to consider technology outside of size and spread, as already been mentioned.
Brilliant. Really appreciate all your perspectives. I know we are on time, so I don't want to keep everybody longer than here. We would certainly get back to you on some of the other questions here, but this has been a fantastic discussion. I want to thank all our panelists, Diana, Monica, Stephanie. Really appreciate you all for sharing your expertise, perspectives on the evolving entity management landscape. And so, panelists, what would be the best way for attendees to stay in touch with you after this call?
LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Great. And I appreciate
the
opportunity. So thank you to everyone.
Of course. We've covered a lot of ground today, and attendees, we've discussed from challenges of managing entities across multiple jurisdictions to, how teams are approaching AI adoption, cost management, compliance. So the insights shared today, I hope it make it clear that entity management is no longer just a back office functionality. It's really a strategic priority for governance teams, in fact, who are navigating these increasing complexity, especially managing entities in various global jurisdictions as well. And, before we wrap up, I do want to remind everyone that you will be receiving a link or recording of today's webinar, along with the link to the report itself that we've been referencing to throughout this call. If you didn't get to your question, we will be following up with additional insights as well via email, and we would love to hear your feedback. So please keep an eye out for a short survey after the webinar. We want to make sure that we continue bringing you valuable discussions just like this, and these panelists who have spent a lot of their critical time sharing some that insight. So thank you all for joining today, and a big thank you again to our amazing panelists. We look forward to continuing this conversation next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.